Welcome everybody. This is an extra class talking about the winter solstice. People have some questions about it. It's an interesting topic because in a few weeks' time, next week actually, we talk about link body practice, and it's actually also a solstice workshop. Dantian meditation is also solstice practice, and you can in a way say that Tai Chi Chuan is an extension of solstice practice. Within the Chinese system, there are several kinds of solstices actually that we can talk about, that you can mention, and that you can say like these are important to think about. There's the yearly solstices, but there's also the uh, solstices of the body at the same time. So you have the yearly, you have the also the daily solstices. So when we talk about the daily solstice, we talk usually about 11 o'clock, between 11 and 1, and we talk about between 11 and 1 in the morning and 11 and 1 in the night. This is the time when the yin and the yang of the day are shifting, right? So at the moment when we look at the day, we see that from about 11, the yin is on its maximum and the yang has been exhausted. So that means that the yang is not there. And there is something that very peculiar about the yang and the yin, because you learn from this what the yang and the yin actually really are in that sense. Everybody talks about the yin as being condensed, and that is true in a particular kind of way. But you see that this condensing, this clumping together, is the result of the absence of yang. Right, because at the moment when it is between 11 and 1 in the night, you can see the yang is exhausted, and because the yang is exhausted, it's very small. Because existed, but at that moment, reality does still exist, so we are still there. The things are still there, and the things are there is not a force at that moment; it just happens to be there, right? So reality doesn't fall apart. If yang would never return, on the other hand, the idea is that very gradually everything will start crumbling. This is why the winter solstice is also associated with things like death, because you see that if yang remains absent for a very long time, things start falling apart and they become dry and brittle and cold and so on. Just like a dead corpse where there's no more yang inside your body, and it starts creating another kind of yang. So that means it's transforming, like how a caterpillar is transforming into a butterfly. Our body is transforming, and you see all kind of worms and maggots coming out, and it's transforming it and turning it into earth. So we become more earth-like. We contribute to the soil of the world. But every day between 11 and 1, the young is born again. So that means that every day there's this new spark of life. And what we do when we are practicing, we're meditating and we're cultivating, we're doing Tai Chi Chuan or we do meditation or anything like that, we try to catch up on that spark, and we try to make that spark stronger and bigger, so that gradually we become more vigorous. And the thing is, within the yang theory, it says you can make yang grow when you get it in a very early stage, and you can speed up the growth. So that's basically what we do when we do self-cultivation. We try to speed up the growth. That's why meditating in the night and practicing in the night is better than meditating or practicing in the day, right? So very often people say like, oh, I should get up early and start practicing at 6 or 7. That is already too late, right? So you have practices for 11 till 1, from 1 till 3, from 3 till 5, from 5 till 7, and then your working day starts. And then by the time it is 3 o'clock in the afternoon, you start slowly picking up and trying to break the degeneration of yang. And then gradually you start working towards the night, where you try to delay the breaking down of yang as much as possible, so that the yang presence is maximized by 11 o'clock in the evening, so that the new spark actually builds on the yang that is left from the day before, right? So that means that in self-cultivation and in practice, what we try to do is we try to increase the yang day by day by day by day. That's a very slow process, so that eventually there is no yin. So the day, the normal degeneration of the day where the yang is young is degenerating is then not taking place. And as a result of that, at the end of the day, we are still full of vitality. We don't need to sleep. Right? That's what I always say when we practice Qigong every day for 4 to 8 hours. Yes? This is the reason why I say that. Because you increase the yang very much with this third level practices, with Bamboo Qigong, or just with Tai Chi Chuan, or with just meditation. You don't really get there. You can catch the spark, but you still have to build up from there, right? So the Dantian meditation is the first, for instance, at between 11 and 1, but then you have to continue going into all kind of practices until eventually you can take the maximum yang of the day and make it stronger and stronger until eventually then it doesn't go away anymore. Right. So this is basically then what is going on with your day. So the winter solstice and the summer solstice of your day is where you change the nature of your practices. So at the deepest of the winter of the day, you start stimulating the spark, and at a high point of the day, you try to break the breakdown of the yang, right? So that's basically it. So if you look at the day in that sense, and you see the cumulative effect over the years, you can see that in the winter time, you have actually exactly the same procedure. In the winter time, when the winter is coming, around the point where we call this is the winter solstice, this is where you have to pick up on the spark of the yang of the year, right? So you start developing the spring at that moment. That means that you have to start cultivating in a way to strengthen the young spark of the spring, so that your spring is as strong as possible by the time the spring actually starts. And so then by the time, one moment, Rami. So by the time that then the spring is starting, you're already very far developed in the development of the yang of your body. At the same time, in the summer solstice, when the time goes in the opposite direction, you have to start doing practice to maintain the yang, so that the yang stays strong, so that by the time it's winter solstice, you still have a lot of yang. So that's the self-cultivation cycle. Rami, what was your question? Your microphone's off. I put your microphone off, otherwise I couldn't hear myself.
So you mean now is like 11 o'clock at night as far as the year goes?
For you, you mean? Yeah, yes, yeah. Now it's between. Now actually, in November, 11 o'clock started. End of November.
Okay. So now is like 12 o'clock?
Now it's like 12 o'clock. And then next month is going to be 1 o'clock. Yeah, so this time is where you pick up the spark, because you have to be busy practicing before the spark starts, right? So that you pick up on that point. And then you have to continue that the whole year through. And then by the time it's summer, that is not the case. What happens when you do not self-cultivate, that's the other part of the process, is what most people are going through in that sense, is that every year in the summer, their young is very large, but they don't have the bodies to contain it. So the body gets exhausted by the young, by the heat, or by the flourishing of the young in any way. So they get exhausted and they start creating problems of exhaustions which are going to haunt them in the winter. So in the winter, they have additional problems, which you can call the exhaustion of the young. So because of the exhaustion of the young, the winter is too cold for them or too wet for them, or whatever kind of situation you have in the winter at that moment in your climate zone. And then that means that in the summer, you're going to have other problems because you do not pick up on the spark of the young. The spark is not strong enough and comes up very slowly, with as a result that by the time it is summer, your young actually is very weak, relatively weak. And so if you count that up year after year after year after year, you see that the aging process actually is the result of this gradual degeneration of the young over time. Yes? But when you look at biological recognition of the biological process, you see that people usually lack the understanding of the biological process. And even in Chinese medicine itself, you see that in modern time, they talk about the winter, you have to go inward and you have to preserve on the inside and you have to hide and protect yourself from the winter and so on. This is a fear response, the fear response of people who do not self-cultivate. Right? The fear response always indicates to protect yourself, to defend yourself, and so stuff like this, instead of trying to innovate. So the winter is the time for innovation, right? It's the time to start growing and to start developing your growth, while the summer is the time of consolidation. So at the moment when you start consolidating, then in the autumn you have the maximum result, you have the maximum fruit, because at the moment when the young start collapsing in nature, you stay on top of it and you have a big harvest, right? This is what we do as a farmer. And when you are a farmer, you are growing things from the spring all the way through the summer, and you try to ripen them to exactly the right point, and you try to maximize the harvest by continuously cultivating and tending your gardens so that you have a maximum harvest at the end. And this is how your body also functions. So this is why the self-cultivation process is very often compared to gardening. Yes. The root of this is in the god Shenong. Shenong is the granddaddy, you can say, of self-cultivation in Daoism. And as a result of that, his understanding of plants and so on, and how to create the right kind of plants to survive and to flourish in nature. This is the root of the whole self-cultivation process that we normally also go through to manage to get a very long life. And the problem is, of course, that we very often learn these kind of things way too late, so that we have to catch up on the process. Rami, what was your question?
So if we're so we say we start the spark now for the year, but we're supposed to practice all the time, all year long. So what's the difference between now and 6 months?
Well, right now we have to practice to stimulate the young, and then we have to consolidate the young. So that's a different kind of way of practicing. It doesn't make any sense to just tell you just like that. You first have to have enough experience to be able to recognize even the fact that it's like that. And then you can start consolidating the young.
So at the level we're at and what you've taught us so far and what we're practicing, is anything significantly different for us to do?
I am only trying to get you right now to try to recognize the young.
Okay.
Right. So when I talk to people, generally they don't really understand young very much, especially when people talk about energy and stuff like this. They have no idea what they're talking about, because they talk about normalcy, the normal experience of things. There's some people on social media that I follow from different cultures, and when I hear people talk, for instance, about Kundalini, or when I hear them talk about prana, pranayama, and so on, they all the time talk about stimulating, feeling good, or feeling strong, or increasing your success. And you see that a lot of people in Qigong world and Tai Chi world, they repeat the same things, and they are all basically tonification techniques that they apply to themselves. So they try to make themselves as strong as possible, they try to make themselves as powerful as possible, but they don't apply them in a beneficial way. With yoga, in a way, I can understand that, and it will be the same for Mexico, because it is already very equatorial. There is actually a continuous summer there. So particular kind of processes, they don't get noticed. I see that with expats that come here from India, for instance. Then they come here because the enormous difference in climate between, say, South India and the Netherlands, they all of a sudden start getting all kind of health problems, because their body has developed all kind of weaknesses that they haven't recognized as normal people. And if they would go through a program like this, they might recognize these programs, these problems in time. And then at the moment when they go to a colder zone, they start noticing how little the young is. So at that moment, when they're coming here, because the young is so weak, they start collapsing almost immediately, or within a few years or something like this, because they cannot catch up anymore with their biology at that moment. So you can really see that this is a problem for many people. At the moment when you look at people moving to a warm climate, like old people, they very often they go to a warm climate. You see that they seem to increase in health because of the warmth in the climate there, where they go to, like Dutch people who go to southern Spain, or people who go from New York to Mexico or something like this. Then at that moment in the warmer climate, they feel much better, right? Lucas is now in a winter climate. If he wouldn't cultivate and he would move to Mexico, a lot of things will biologically go much easier. So he doesn't have to do the work for it. And as a result of that, everything seems to be going better. But then on the longer term, because of the lack of cultivation, at a certain point he starts creating all kind of holes in his health, which still cause him to age. But because he doesn't understand it, because the same cycle, in a young cycle, still takes place also in the equatorial countries as in the northern countries. The only thing is that in the northern countries, you are forced to pay more attention to the young, right? When you self-cultivate, then the cultivation in these northern countries has to be stronger than when you live in a southern country. Like when I was in China, in the mountains, young is very easy to cultivate. So if you know the right techniques, you can make progress very fast. If you can't make the right techniques, it's just very tiring, right? And then at the moment when you come back, you come to a place like the Netherlands, you feel very strong. And then you feel how hard you have to work because of the Dutch climate to maintain that same strength over a longer time. So you really have to work to make sure that you get to that point. But on the other hand, if you have a country like the Netherlands or in Canada or other places where it is very cold, very rainy, or where the climate is very, well, terrible, so to say, because of the lack of young in the time zone or the geographic zone where you are, then at that moment, the young that you cultivate there is way stronger than the young that you cultivate in a place where the young is very easy. So if Chris in England, which is probably climatically the worst area from Europe, if he develops the young properly, then at that moment his young will be very strong, right? But at the moment when he doesn't, then he will be affected by the yin much more. And you see that the yin is actually what affects people very strongly in most of the diseases. There's a relatively few diseases that actually are caused by yang. But what can happen is because of lack of proper maintenance, is that the yang can turn, because of stagnation or whatever kind of thing, can turn into its opposite. And then it actually doesn't turn yin, but it turns into fire. And fire in that moment starts eating your body. That moment. And when you meditate and you start working on feeling bliss in your heart, for instance, then you create fire, and the fire creates great feelings, yes, in the beginning, until you start noticing that your body slowly starts turning into ash. So in the beginning you feel like, oh, that's really great, I feel so happy in my heart. And it's the same like when you have to laugh a lot because of something, and at a certain point you start noticing your laughing starts turning into crying. You see this very often in children that can't stop laughing, they turn into crying. So if you look at it like that, you see that a lot of people, they celebrate the warmth of the summer, and then they create fire problems, which will bite them by the time it is winter. And so they exhaust themselves, and then the young that they could have had actually has become exhausted. In the same, you can see in your garden, if you grow plants, if you over cultivate, or if you over celebrate all your plants, either your harvest is already gone before it's finished, or you have attracted all kind of pests, which actually ate most of your harvest, and then you also don't have anything. So you can see that these pests that are in your garden are, in a way, they are the fire, the food turning into fire, because it's being eaten alive basically while being cultivated. And so you can see these aspects all the time coming back. So you can see that it is continuously a matter of yin and yang alternating, where the yang actually is growing up and it is coming down again. And the yin is actually the background noise that is always there, namely existence itself. So the existence itself is yin, but the liveliness of it, that is actually the yang. Yes. So like in Rami's room, there's this cabinet there in the background. That is existence. Yes. But moving it around, that is yang. Yes. So when you talk about then this whole process of solstices, you see that it is something that either is managed or it is not managed. And what you see, like for instance, people protecting themselves against the cold, this is also a way of artificially maintaining young by keeping yourself warm. But you also can see that by keeping yourself artificially warm, you also invite things like flu and cold and stuff like that in your body. So you can get all kind of pains, or you can get breathing problems, or you can get all kind of other things. So what is called the seasonal diseases. Yes, Claudia?
Then by artificial, you mean the
Coats.
eaters?
Eaters? Yeah, they're clothes. Yes, your clothes. Warm clothes. Like I have two daughters, as you know, and one of my daughters, she's very hot on the inside, so I have to continuously put a brake on her that she doesn't, turns herself into fire all the time. So every now and then this fire flares up too much, and then she becomes really very quickly angry about things. But you can see in her behavior that because the fire is so big, she doesn't feel the need to dress very warm when she goes outside. So she's still wearing her summer coat. So her mother getting very angry, like, you have to put on your winter coat. You have to put on your winter coat because it's cold outside, but she doesn't feel it, right? Because she's very warm. It could be great. I remember my Sifu, when he saw her, he was like, oh, she already has a lot of yang inside. So if cultivated properly, she could become a great Kung Fu master or a great medicine master, whatever you want to train her for. Yes, because she's already that hot, but it has to be guided in proper direction. And like Themis is more like her father by nature because of whatever kind of reason, more coldish in the body. So it takes much more effort actually to get to that point. So for Pallas, that will be really very easy to get to that point. But for many people, because they're not like that, they have to really work for it. That's the other side of it. Because if you can get something very easy because you're already halfway, because the young by birth is already very big, you also have more risk that you turn into fire and that you get all kind of physical damage as a result of that. While on the other hand, if you have to acquire all these qualities, then at that moment, they are your qualities, right? So you really have learned them and you have understood them and you have mastered them over time, and you really slaved yourself basically for it to get to that point. And that is then what is making you a better teacher or a better therapist or something like this, because at that moment you know the details of the process, while somebody who has these qualities by nature actually has learned things in an easy way, which is how do you say, not very good for learning. It's only very good for being able to do things. And so that's very different. By the way, which made me think just now, because Sifu was always very much against women exercising, because he thought it's only Kung Fu, things like this is only for men, old culture. Women, they're not suitable for these kind of things. But it's very funny. Like, for instance, my sister Li Fang, he never teach her because she's a woman. But when he saw Pallas, he was immediately like, she has to be properly taught, because then she can be really great. And so you can really see this kind of recognition plays a big role in things. And what it is that a lot of people, they feel like as if they have a lot of young because they feel a lot of energy and stuff like this. But that is not exactly the same. My network is not working very well, so here and there the videos are disappearing. I hope everything will go okay. I think my kids upstairs are using too much bandwidth. It will come back in a moment. I hope nobody's falling out. You see everything is okay, Claudia? Does everybody else see everything okay or hear everything okay?
Yeah.
So at least I can hear your voice. You can hear me, so I can continue, and that's good. Then the images will come back later. Now Yolanda is here, but Claudia was not there. And now more images come back again, so that's good. So you see that this process of of this yin and yang as it happens throughout the year is actually two things that happen parallel to each other. So very often we say, oh, but yin and yang are two sides of the same, which is also true. There's yin and yang which are the same, but there's also the yin and yang of existence and life. So these are two different kinds of things. Like a mountain does exist, but is not alive. If you have a crystal in your house or something like this, beautiful to look at, that's a thing. Yeah, it is there, but it is not alive. It has some radiance, but it is not a mountain, so it's not very strong. And it cannot initiate anything, right? But you as a person, you can initiate things. That is why in spiritual traditions like Daoism and Buddhism and Hinduism, I guess also, not sure, they say it's very fortunate to be born as a human being, because at that moment you have the freedom to change and to develop and to cultivate yourself, while a god cannot. A god is born into its role and it dies into its role. Like the Christian God doesn't really change. It becomes a different god. Like the old God, the God of the Old Testament, turned into another God. It died, and his son, what was created from him, took over and ruled another 2,000 years. And if Jesus doesn't have a son or a daughter or anything like this in this coming, say, few hundred years, then that's the end of the Christian tradition. So there's no transcendence. In Taoism, you see that there was the time of Yudi, the god Yudi, and then the takeover by Yudi in this period by Chengwu. And then Chengwu has another god taking over. In Buddhism, you see there was the Amitabha Buddha, and now it is the time that the Maitreya Buddha is going to take over. So you see there's continuously this taking over from the one religion to the other religion, because the gods have a limited life of about 2,000 to 4,000 years maximum. And that is how long a religion can take place. You can see that if you look at the oldest finds of cities, like in Turkey, these cities, the gods are very different from the gods 5,000 years later or 5,000 years after that. And so there's this really continuous transition between different gods. So they have limited life. And for demons, it's the same. Demons don't live that long, yes, but they still live pretty long because they are like gods, and they're very limited in that sense in how they grow. Animals, they can cultivate themselves. They talk about fox spirits and snake spirits and stuff like this. They can cultivate themselves, but it is pretty rare. So if you have 1,000 snakes, then maybe there is a little bit of a snake that is becoming a little bit conscious, right? With animals that we have as pets, they become more conscious because they learn a lot from being around us. So that is why a lot of animals, they seek human beings because they learn from it. Even if you just feed the birds around you and you talk with them, and you will see that the birds recognize you at a certain point and they follow you around, and they start observing you, and they start learning things from you, so that in their life they slowly start getting a spark of consciousness. This spark of consciousness is also part of the development of young. So they start adapting their life to be able to benefit from you. So they turn from wild animals into cultivating animals, right? So that, talking about reincarnation in that sense, if they go to their next life, then at that moment in their next life, they start with a benefit. So even if they come back as the same kind of bird, right, they come back as a bird which has a little bit more consciousness. So this is how reincarnation and gradually contributes to things. This is what Tibetan lamas make use of in the form of earthly immortality, in the sense that they reincarnate and they come back as human beings again, but of what they then say is a higher quality than the life before. So you can see that from life to life, you can see that life has a spark of yang inside, but then at the end of life, if you can maintain the yang, and at that moment, the yang is being taken with you into the next life, right? So then at that moment in the next life, you already start partly conscious. This is why in the Neidan practice, we try to cultivate first the Jing, which is the earth-like quality, so that we can develop a similarity to the permanence of earth. And then from there, we develop the Qi, in the sense that if the earth quality is flourishing, then at that moment we can start doing things correctly. And then at that moment, because we do things correctly, we have this awareness radiance because we are aware of things. Everything we start doing starts to become more widespread, you can say. People can recognize the quality of particular kind of things, and not everybody will recognize it, but people who are in similar kind of processes usually recognize these things. And at the moment when you get to that point where you are conscious enough, you can take that with you into the next life, if you do not manage to live long enough in this life to develop that further. Because the stronger the yang is, the less likely it is that you're going to die, right? So the idea is that you can prolong your life so long as a human being, cultivate and grow further, that you can live for about 1,000 years. Whether it's transcendent as a spiritual being or as a living being, it doesn't really matter that much, but about 1,000 years. And in that time, you can transform into your next stage, which might be a god, or might be another kind of immortal being, or being reborn, or whatever you are cultivating at that moment. Yes? So then you take that yang with you and you go to the next life. In a shorter term, you can take it to your next life as a human being. Like Tibetan Lamas do with a reincarnation cycle. So then we talk about 3 different solstices, right? We have the day solstices, we have the year solstices, and we have the life solstices. Yes? Then there's actually a 4th one. We're not ready yet, because at the moment when you become more aware, you also become more part of a culture. Yeah? And you become more consciously aware of the fact that you are part of a culture. That culture goes through the same cycle too. Like our Western culture is now just getting into its consciousness state. We are self-conscious, but we are not yet organized. We're not yet developed. So we are in a relatively early stage. We might also, because of the lack of consciousness, we can die as a culture relatively fast after about 500 years. Yes. While the Chinese culture has been around for 2,000 years and has been in this process of decay because of the lack of cultivation at a certain point. And now at this moment, there's people who try to revive that. You see the same kind of revivalist movements you see in India and in Tibet and in all kinds of other cultures, Native American cultures. They have revivalist movements to try to bring their culture back to life so that the values of their culture also comes back. That's the cultivation of yang also, right? So a culture also has this history, has these cycles of yang and yin also in itself. And you can even see in that sense that because of all the innovations being done in the last, say, 2,500 years, that has been a cycle. And now what, like New Ages say, we go to a next cycle because of their horoscopic cycle. You can say, okay, it might very well be that this historical cycle now is coming to an end. In India, they talk about the Kali Yuga, the Kali cycle coming to an end, and the Kali cycle is the ending of an earlier cycle, which is of a lesser quality than the other one. So this is the yin quality of that of the Yuga cycle. Yes. Sounds interesting. So the cultivation of things is never really ending, right? So this is why, like when Rami said before, so but actually we have to cultivate ourselves the whole day. Yes, and you're not just cultivating yourself; you're also cultivating your environment. You're cultivating society. You're cultivating history, and so on and so forth. So in all these kind of things, you can play a role. So that's the cultivation process that Taoism talks about. So it's the use of the solstices, it's the cycles of the yang in life, in the year, in the day, and in history. Yes? When we do Tai Chi Chuan, ironically, because this is a Tai Chi Chuan lesson, of course, we do the same. At the moment when you do Tai Chi Chuan, in the first movements, we are emulating the movement of water, right? The rising and the control of water. This is actually the control of yang, because the yang in our body is not like some vague energy, but it is the movement of yang, the warming of the yang, the warming of the water in your body, which is bringing this momentum in your body. So every time when you go through a yang, Tai Chi cycle, you do the same. You bring up the yang, right? So you're basically practicing the experience of yang inside yourself. And then by the time you're at the end of your Tai Chi Chuan, you try to consolidate the yang that you are developing throughout your form at the end. Of course, it's for Daoist forms. For the family forms, that is not playing the same role because they talk about different things sometimes. There's a lot missing in these family forms, and unfortunately, because of the family attitude of many Tai Chi practitioners, it is not very much used in Daoist Tai Chi Chuan too. So in that sense, a lot of Daoist Tai Chi forms, they are being practiced as family forms. Yes. So the original idea of cultivation through Tai Chi Chuan is not there. So when we are doing Tai Chi Chuan, the attention that we have in the movements, the attention that we have for our palms, the attention that we have for the development of Jing inside our body, the opening of the gates, the attention for the Dantian, and so on and so on. This is all to facilitate the development of Yang inside yourself as a part of the cultivation of the Yang of your everyday life. Yes? So you can see that even on the micro scale of just practicing, then at that moment when you would not be practicing, so at the end of your Tai Chi Chuan, you have to, that is the winter of your life, right? So every moment that you're not practicing, that's your winter. And every time when you're practicing, that is your 11 till 1. Yes? Or if you're doing very well, you're 11 till 1 the next day, right? So after 12 hours, yes, or 11, yeah. You're 11 till 1 till 11 till 1, something like this. Yeah, so the development of the Yang. And then when you're not practicing, and at that moment you have to learn to maintain it. So that means that during your daily non-practicing activities, you want to make sure that you keep on attentive and cultivating the Yang inside your body all the time. Yes? So you want to get to that point. Wow, that's a lot of secrets about Daoist cultivation that you all got at once. It's also very depressing to listen to these things because you think like, then I don't have any social life and I don't have this and I don't have that. That's right. That's right. If you enjoy life, you don't have a social life. If you do not enjoy life, you kill yourself with your social life. Like
that last statement is a great way to get a lot of followers.
Yes. That's going to be the end of the movie. Nobody watches all the way till the end. So that's what I noticed with all these social media movies is that after 5 minutes, they think like, I don't have concentration for that. I first have to go do something. I have to go take a beer or something.
5 minutes? How about like 10 seconds, 15 seconds?
Well, I'm thinking positive. But it's also one of the reasons why many big masters, they talk about things for a long time. Because the talking in itself is already a cultivation of the audience, right? So it's not that because they tell interesting things that people listen, but it is also a particular kind of thing that, how do you say, people give into to cultivate. Like when you read a book, after how many pages you start getting sleepy? 10 pages. Oh, that's good. After 1 page, 2 pages, see? That's lack of cultivation. Because if you read a book and you're really good at reading, you can read the whole book in an hour. Even if it's 400 pages, you can read very fast and one day you can finish a book if it is a very difficult book. But you really have to cultivate that. And this is what Confucius already talked about. He said, like most people, they don't have any focus. So they fall asleep very quickly when they actually have to cultivate. Yes. And if he said from a certain student, like he's my best student because he can stay concentrated for 3 days. And that was actually a really big compliment. He said like they can stay like that for 3 days in a row, but then they really have to take a rest and they lose their concentration, they lose their focus. So the whole point is to try to surpass continuously yourself and to try to focus more and more and more. And that is also with reading. So reading something to be able to read because books have a lot of knowledge and there's a lot of effort in transferring that knowledge. Of course, not only physically useful, but nonetheless, the whole process of collecting knowledge is the self-cultivating process. You need a lot of knowledge to be able to discern between good knowledge and less good knowledge.
You're fragmented.
But you can hear my story.
Fragmented.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't think we missed anything. I think it was just delayed.
Okay.
Maybe it was completely
The antenna system falls away sometimes. I think it's maybe because of the storm. The kids are supposed to be to bed, but I think they're not to bed yet.
So
Yes.
can we do Tai Chi too?
I'm sorry, what do you say, Rami?
Do Tai Chi now?
Yeah, we're almost ready at the end of the story. I told you I'm going to take a long time. I'm going to take 4 hours just to talk about the solstice. Like a great master. But yeah, so we talk about social media and self-cultivation. All these kind of things, they're the same. Like when you look social media, what kind of programs do you watch? Do you watch entertainment, or do you watch things that are informative and you watch it all the way till the end? Do you watch social media things that last for 5 minutes or 2 minutes, or do you look social media things that last for 2 or 3 hours? So you build a condition, you build a stamina at a certain point. Yes, and what?
I watch things that last for like 1 minute, and I watch like 100 of them for 2 or 3 until they get to 2 or 3
Yes.
hours.
One of my daughters, she is very good in gaming, since you can do that for 6 hours in a row without stopping. And I'm telling her, like, look, you can be very concentrated, but you concentrate on things that are not useful to you. So use that same power to be concentrated on something else. And at that moment, you will be really become a great person. She's insecure about herself, but it is because she's cultivating the wrong things. And that is with most people. Most people are insecure about themselves because they cultivate the wrong things. They can be very focused. Like, for instance, I have this friend who's really focused on eating. He can really eat a lot. Yes. And he can put a lot of effort in that and in the digestion of it also. But he cannot do anything that is really useful for his life. One way or the other, when I say, come exercising, he says like, nah, nothing for me. So he's like a complete couch potato, but he can really focus very hard on eating and cooking and stuff like this and all these kind of things. And he really puts a lot of effort in it. And I'm like, what a waste of your potential, right? So that's basically it. And everybody has these parts where they can really cultivate very strongly. They just have to put it into focus on things which are useful for them. And then a remark like, self-cultivation brings you alive, and cultivating the bad things in life, the pleasure things in life, actually destroy your life at the same time. It's the same like drugs, alcohol, eating a lot, candy, whatever, watching TV all evening, all day. Yes. However fun it can be, it is not very useful. So even if you watch TV, you can meditate at the same time by focusing on yourself, and then at a certain point lose your interest for the TV. So you can transform it by meditating while doing it. So that at a certain point it's not important anymore. So you transfer it gradually, and you transfer it from something that creates yin into something that creates yang. And so in the
Would you
winter,
say that
you take the generation by focusing, so you make it into yang, right? And in the summer, you take the degeneration, but you maintain the yang. Same time. What did you want to say, Yolanda?
Would you say then in that sense also that people who are working a lot behind the desk, the computer or something, that they, when they are going out just for getting a drink, that at that moment they are being put back to their body, and then they realize, oh, I feel cold, or then they immediately need to go to the toilet because they were so focused into the computer part or in the screen part that
Get to maintain their body, yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And it's with Tai Chi Chuan too, because then people are starting very good, they're focusing on the Dantian, and then they have to start moving and they lose it, and their limbs go in all directions except the right one. And it's the same. So it's just a lack of development, lack of cultivation at that moment. And even though they have a lot of fun, they feel a lot of things, they have a feeling that they really pick up on a lot of things, but there's also a lot of holes in it. So the dedication to actually the cultivation process to learn something is relatively vague. I'm making jokes to my daughters all the time. Okay, so try to get a breakfast without you using your phone. Yeah? So I told them at some point, you can only use your phone if you have done your daily tasks, which also means eating without a phone. Because you have to limit people, and children you can still guide in a particular direction, but with adults they have to volunteer. They have to volunteer to do things. In the past, in a monastery, you would just be beaten into submission until you would cultivate yourself, but then you learn much less. So a lot of monks, they died relatively young because they were submissed into their cultivation process. Yes, they were not really cultivating, they were just afraid to be beaten. That's not the same. Yes? Okay, so I think about solstice talking, we have talked about a lot of different kind of subjects that are related to it, and you see that this yin-yang cycle is present in a lot of different kind of things. I will put this also in the I Ching program, so you can find it back there too. But I will also put it into the Patreon page, so you can watch it back there. Yes? Okay. Great. Let me see where I can now stop the recording, if I can get it back there. Yes.